Good afternoon, friends. Today we are going to discuss a lesson by G.B. Shaw. The title of the lesson is Spoken English and Broken English. By G.B. Shaw. Spoken English and Broken English. G.B. Shaw means George Bernard Shaw, who was born in Dublin in the year 1856 and died in year 1950. G.B. Shaw is one of the well-known, famous dramatist, who was born in 1856 and died in 1950. George Bernard Shaw was a most prolific dramatist and writer of the 20th century, a pioneer of Fabian Society, an organization aimed at transforming Britain into a socialist state. He devoted himself to several causes, including the eradication of the prostitution, abolition of the private property, radically changing the voting system, simplification of the English spelling, and reform of the English alphabets. Most of these themes are mirrored in his plays, which revolutionized the British theatre of the time. In his plays, Shaw portrayed contemporary moral and social problems using irony and humor. Infused with his legendary Shavian wit, his most celebrated plays include Caesar and Cleopatra in 1901 and Mrs. Warren's Profession in 1898, John Burns' Other Island 1904, Major Barbara 1907, Pygmalion in 1913, Saint John 1924, and in 1925 he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. His most famous book is Pygmalion, which was written in 1913. Pygmalion was written in 1913. Here G.B. Shaw was not only worked as author, but he was a social worker. He was a person from the moment. He was part of the various movement in that period of Britain. Basically, he was from Ireland. That he was born in Dublin, and his major works also reflected his views about society, his views about system, his views about the voting system, his views about statesmen, and he was one of the pioneer of the revolutionary movement of the socialist state. He worked on various platforms. He not only worked so as to form or so as to have the revolution or have the changes in society, but also he worked for the development of language. He also worked for the development of language because in England, though in those days there were the number of classes, the most reputed, it is elite one, then the high class, then the middle class, then those who are in the lower class. Such type of distribution that we may divide, that in that period the pronunciation of that people living in England or living in Britain were not correct, though they were English by birth, but the pronunciation, the tone, the intonation pattern was quite different from one another, and as there was a difference between intonation pattern, tone, and pronunciation of the people of Britain. So, G.B. Shaw worked so as to develop the English language in the nation where it is and it was mother tongue of Britain, and G.B. Shaw's work was to develop the language. He wanted to make it more and more simple. His intention was to make the English language very simple and lucid, that everyone should understand and everyone should speak the language. See here, and in addition to this one, the most important, in year 1925 he was awarded the prize Nobel. He was awarded the prize Nobel Prize. It was most prestigious award. It was Nobel for literature. It was very prestigious. Nobel for literature in 1925. See here the lesson. I will go through the lesson and simultaneously we will discuss the same one. Spoken English and Broken English was a talk delivered by G.B. Shaw on the BBC show, which amply reflects his engagement with the English language, a concern that was central theme of many of his plays, including Pygmalion. Shaw felt so strongly about the cause that in his will he left a large part of his estate to a project to revamp the English alphabet. His energetic and aggressive style of speaking is quite evident in his entertaining essay on English language. I am now going to suppose that you are a foreign student of English language and you desire to speak it well enough to be understood. When you travel in British sorry when you travel in British Commonwealth or in America, or when you meet a native of those countries, or it may be that you are yourself a native, you are a little ashamed, or which perhaps prevents you speak in a provincial or Cockney dialect, of which you are a little ashamed, or which perhaps prevents you from obtaining some employment which is open to those only who speak what is called correct English. Now, whether you are a foreigner or a native, the first thing I must impress on you is that there is no such thing as ideally correct English. No two British subjects speak exactly alike. I am member of a committee established by British Broadcasting Corporation, that is BBC, for the purpose of deciding how the utterances of speakers employed by corporation should be pronounced in order that they should be a model of correct speech for the British Island. All such members of that committee are educated persons whose speech would pass as correct and refined in any society or any employment in London. Our chairman is the poet laureate who is not only an artist whose materials are the sounds of spoken English but a specialist in their pronunciation. One of our members is Sir Johnson Forbes Robertson, famous not only as an actor but the beauty of his speech. I was selected for service on the committee because as a writer of plays I am to superintend their rehearsals and to listen critically to the way in which they are spoken by actors who are by profession trained speakers, being myself a public speaker of long experience. See here, the GB Shaw is speaking about the committee. The GB Shaw is speaking about the provincial belonging to province or local. Provincial Cockney is the native speaker of London, of especially of the working class born in the East End, speaking a characteristic dialect of English. Here he has given particularly an example of a class, that is the provincial Cockney, that is the a class of the people from the east end of the London, whose dialects are very peculiar or particular and very correct. But here, while speaking about the dialect, while speaking about the major form, here we have a reference that the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, has formed a committee where 3 members were appointed: a poet laureate, then an artist or the actor, and GB Shaw as a writer or the dramatist. Here, these 3 were appointed by BBC so as to have uniform guidelines for the pronunciation of the correct English, because though it was a native language, the number of peoples are pronouncing a single word in number of ways. If just you give any word like no, they may say no, nay, nah, such type of the pronunciation. Nowadays also number of English speakers used to pronounce no as nay. Here So okay, forget it. It was an example, but G.B. Shaw wanted to give us that the number of people from the number of classes in the society are speaking language at different level with different type of the dialect, different type of the tone, and you may say correct and incorrect pronunciation. Some of speaking very correctly and some of are speaking incorrect, because it was a committee who had to decide whether the spoken language in England, especially Britain, was correct or not. Here, G.B. Shaw, as a dramatist and as a well-known writer, was appointed as a member of that committee. That committee, known as much as anyone knows about English speech, and yet its members do not agree as to pronunciation of some of the simplest and commonest words in the English language. Two simplest and commonest words in any language are yes and no, but no two members of the committee pronounce them exactly alike. All that can be said is that every member pronounced them in such a way that they would not only be intelligible in every English speaking country, but would stamp the speaker as a cultivated person, as distinguished from an ignorant and illiterate one. You will say, well, that is good enough for me, that is how I desire to speak. See here, the G.B. Shaw is speaking about the spoken English. G.B. Shaw is speaking about the correct pronunciation. The pronunciation is the soul of any language. Because if you pronounce any word correctly, then the listener can understand the meaning of the word, and the message can be communicated. If you want to communicate a message, if you want to have the dialogue with another person, then in such case the pronunciation should be correct, and so as to pronounce the very correctly, G.B. Shaw is here speaking about the same one. But which member of the committee will you take for your model? There are Irish members, Scottish members, Welsh members, Oxford University members, American members, all recognizable as such by their differences of speech. They differ also according to the country in which they were born. Now, as they all speak differently, it is nonsense to say that they all speak correctly. All we can claim is that they all speak presentably, and that if you speak as they do, you will be understood in an English speaking country and accepted as a person of good social standing. I wish I could offer you your choice among them as a model, but for the moment I am afraid you must put up with me, an Irishman. See here, he has given us a example about, suppose a member is from or a person is from Scotland, one is from Oxford University, one is from America, one is from Ireland, one is from Irish, one is from Britain. they are speaking the same language, that is English, but very differently, because the dialect depends upon native language. Suppose a person from India, suppose a person who is living in city Mumbai or Delhi, and he is asked to speak English language, then the person from Delhi may use some of the Hindi words, the person from Mumbai may use some of the Marathi words while speaking in English, because the impact of local language is always on the language you are speaking, and it also affects on your dialect, it also affects on your intonation pattern. Because suppose a single language is there, suppose a Marathi language is there, then the people from Mumbai, people from Konkan, people from West Maharashtra, people from Marathwada, people from Vidarbha, people from Nashik area or Khandesh are speaking the same language, Marathi, but the dialect is quite different from one another. Take example of the Hindi language. Suppose a person from Jammu and Kashmir speaks differently from the person Uttar Pradesh. The person from Uttar Pradesh speaks quite different from the person from Bihar, Gujarat, Delhi, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, because the effect of the native language, that is the dialect, affects your language. See here, while speaking about the same one, G.B. Shaw says that I have said enough to you about the fact that no two native speakers of English speak it alike. See here, the two native speakers do not speak same same as one another. There are differences in language of the two native speakers, but perhaps you are clever enough to ask me whether I myself speak it in the same way. I must confess at once that I do not. Nobody does. I am at present speaking to an audience of many thousands of gramophonists. Gramophonist means a person uses gramophone. Many of whom are trying too hard to follow my words syllable by syllable. If I were to speak to you as carelessly as I speak to my wife at home, this record would be useless. And if I were to speak to my wife at home as carefully as I am speaking to you, she would think I was going mad. As a public speaker, I have to take care that every word I say is heard distinctly at the far end of large halls, obtaining thousands of people. But at home, when I have to consider only my wife sitting within 6 feet of me at breakfast, I take so little pains with my speech that very often, instead of giving me the expected answer, she says, "Don't mumble and don't turn your head away when you speak. I can't hear a word you are saying, and she also is a little careless. See here, in this part, G.B. Shaw is giving the example. Suppose you are speaking in public place. Suppose you are addressing audience. Suppose you are addressing a rally. Suppose you are addressing a group of the people. In that case, your tone, your words, your pronunciation should be very clear and should be as per norms, where your tone pattern should be as per the rules of the grammar, and G.B. Shaw is speaking about pure English. Everyone is speaking English, but objection of the G.B. Shaw is that no one is speaking very correctly. He admits that fact that he speaks incorrect English at home with his wife, but whenever he is in public place, he used to follow the rules of the language, as English is a global language and helps in communicating with one another at the national and the international level. To convey your message, one should speak in such a way that others are able to understand you. In this way, G.B. Shaw is speaking about the spoken English and broken English. Broken English means that whenever the person speaks incorrectly, incorrect pronunciation are nothing but the broken English. Here in this lesson, G.B. Shaw speaks about the impact of the English language, then the study of the language, importance of the language, correct English and incorrect English. He speaks about the phonology, morphology, syntax, sentences, semantics, dialect, syllables, and at last, he traces on the point to speak English very correctly. In this way, we have concluded the lesson spoken English and broken English in short, where the G.B. Shaw speaks about the language, development of the language through his lesson spoken English and broken English. Okay, thank you.